Recently I made a video ranking all of Elden Ring's Remembrance bosses based off of their strength in the lore, which received overwhelmingly positive feedback. Thank you for that, by the way. And after feeling suited to rank the DLC bosses now, and seeing a ranking including the DLC bosses, that's to be made by someone less than knowledgeable on anything regarding the verse, no offense, and seeing these utterly batshit rankings in the comments, I had to make this video soon. So now I'll be going over where I placed the new Remembrance bosses in comparison to my original list, although I'm also going to throw Bale in there, because not including him would be lame as hell. These characters will all be in their prime, just like before, and at the end of the video, I'll also go through all the rankings again in a tier list format, laid out for you to see without having to skim through my videos for my rankings. Obviously, spoilers ahead for anyone watching. First off has to be the Scatter Tree avatar, ranking above the Regal Ancestor Spirit and below Godric. You can make an argument for being a couple ranks higher, but I personally just don't think those arguments are all that great. The argument in question would be through the Land of Shadow incantation you get from its Remembrance, stating it channels the power of the Scatter Tree. This doesn't necessarily scale it to the Scatter Tree as a whole, as it isn't inherently channeling its full power, and it can't rank higher than, say, the Fire Giant anyways, since the Fire Giant can burn through the Erd Tree with the Fell God's flames, and the Scatter Tree is a mere shadow of the Erd Tree. Other than this, the Overgrown Weed has no feats and pretty much has no scaling as a whole, aside from having Miquella's Shattered Great Rune, which doesn't have any of its original power anymore. Next in this list is an overrated fodder and really a fraud in the community at the moment, the Mother of Fingers, Meteor. She's below Godric and above the Sunflower in her best scaling, and I mean her best scaling, and being called a Shooting Star in her Remembrance, which is likely comparable to the Falling Star Beast, meaning she's creating a large town level crater. Most of the scaling people try to use for her is just straight headcanon. Let's just say she was abandoned for a reason. Next up will be the Divine Beast, Dancing Lion, above Godric but lower than the Fire Giant. It has a much larger arsenal with the Storm, Ice, and Lightning elements, which it gets from the heavens. It has a statement of being from a higher sphere as well, which could be much better with some very much so desired context. But even without it, the statement has a level of narrative significance, which puts it above Godric, although I can't really place it much higher with what we have on it. Right above the Divine Beast, but still below the Fire Giant, is the Putrescent Knight. The Putrescent Knight I'm putting higher than the Divine Beast purely through its use of Ghost Flame, which can burn even death itself, which I just don't think the Divine Beast could really beat, especially since the Putrescent Knight is already dead itself, so even if you bypass its durability, you're not really doing much. So I don't really think anyone below this placement can really do shit to win here. My reason for putting it still below the Fire Giant is due to the claim made in the base game that the Black Flame monks could have actually fled from their position in the mountaintops due to being afraid of the Fell God's flames, which implies the Black Flame's inferiority to the Fire Giants. Next up is Midra, above Moog but below Estelle. He's pretty fraudulent himself as far as scaling goes, since most people seem to think he's some absurd top tier. But you have to realize he's only super strong as far as abilities go. Physical stat-wise, he was straight up too weak to be the actual Lord of Frenzy, and he has no physical strength feats really other than ripping his own head off. So ironically, he's sub-Godric level physically, and is getting carried by his abilities here. But he's not getting any higher. Nothing is stopping Estelle from smiting him with a meteor immediately, and I highly doubt Frenzy would work super effectively on Estelle anyways, but would work similarly to how it does the rats, with merely infecting them in some way. Next up above Estelle and below Radahn is the Hog Rider himself, Commander Gaius. Gaius rivaled a younger Radahn who can infer from the gear Radahn has after his rival is immediately before the Star Scourge conflict, meaning Gaius should be at least relatively comparable to the same Radahn who held all the stars and likely a significant number of Estelles in the sky for decades if not longer. This can be backed up with how Gaius' gravity attacks are super similar to Radahn's, with even a few ones unique to himself. So while Gaius may not be perfectly relative to a prime Radahn, he's definitely nearing that level, giving him plenty to rank snugly in this position. After this will be Ramana, right above Radahn, although still under Fortisax. She gains the position through straight up having the same rot capabilities as Goddess Melania, which is absurd, and unlike with Midra, can actually carry her above Radahn, Estelle, and Gaius, as none of them can even really counter her rot. She stops here though, as Fortisax's blight capabilities are still extremely broken, and Fortisax's endurance ironically should allow him to continue fighting, even if he did get Scarlet Rot. As he's been infected with literal death itself, instead of becoming weaker, he weaponized it and stayed with his friend for decades if not longer. She also just doesn't have the physicals to be any higher. This is the first of two placements I have for Consort Radahn, this being the lowest end for him above Ramana and below Fortisax. My reason for having two placements here is because it's difficult to accurately gauge his power in this form, since he has lower physicals, more to his moveset, and then possible unquantifiable amps from Miquella, which could push him anywhere up to the later placement. In this form, he has new Blood Flame capabilities at the cost of weaker physicals due to having Mohg's body, but in this form we can infer from his resistances he's actually much more resistant to rot, which I believe can actually point to the lore and grant him this. With Miquella's entire journey starting because he wanted to cure his sister's rot, I think it's entirely feasible here. This is implying he actually found a way to, meaning Consort Radahn here could actually be immune to rot. Miquella's amps here though are also again unquantifiable, so I don't think he's definitively above Fortisax, especially with still having no way to counter that Death Lightning or those Blight Clouds. Next on the list below Morgott but above Fortisax is Mesmer. This will be another instance of two placements, the later one being of course Base Serpent Mesmer. This version of Mesmer can slaughter like nearly the entirety of the Divine Beasts, which would be a pretty high amount, but my reason for scaling him this high is due to some comparisons made before the DLC was even released, but I believe is further built upon it. He has direct comparison to Morgott in the promotional image sitting in his throne, which expanded upon in an interview with Miyazaki. Miyazaki states that this is supposed to represent how he stands on equal footing with the demigods and rivals them, but I believe as far as in a narrower lens regarding power, this can indicate him being similar to Morgott. He has a very similar role to Morgott in the DLC, as he is a loyal butcher who has been forsaken by his own family and people, but remains their real savior until the end despite the massacring of others. He should also be at least resistant to effects such as rot due to the Seal of Grace, which is implied to keep the effects of things outside of the Golden Order out, as seen with the Abyssal Serpent. I believe he can get past Fortisax through the fact that his flame can never go out and never extinguishes, so once Fortisax is hit with it, he's screwed, and Mesmer can pin him with it from afar pretty easily. Surprisingly enough, Rellana is taking the next spot, right above Rellana and below Malenia. Unlike Rellana actually has two moons, which should imply their capabilities as far as sorcery goes, but it goes even further. Rellana is actually stated to have learned the fire-based attacks due to how the carried magic simply couldn't grant Mesmer succor, implying that it was incapable of truly aiding him to a satisfactory extent. This shouldn't only extend to pre-fire Rellana, but to Rennala and possibly even Ranni as a whole, since it's referring to just the carrying moon sorcerer branch as a whole. Then when she learns fire, she actually joins Mesmer, which then implies that once she gained both fire and the moon, she's able to actually help Mesmer and is therefore stronger than she was before, as well as the carrying magic's users. I think this line of thinking is even consistent to the main game, in which Radagon, after marrying Rennala, learns carrying magic to become a complete warrior, so we can infer from this that Rellana had to achieve this complete warrior status to be of aid to Mesmer. Speaking of Mesmer, his Base Serpent form is taking the spot right above Rellana, but just shy of Malenia in the top 10. He should just be straight up above Rellana from what I talked about in the Rellana section, but if that's not enough, he has more and arguably better inverse, starting with Black Knight Commander Andreas. Andreas should be below Mesmer, as Mesmer casually imprisoned him after his revolt, but that's not discrediting Andreas in any way. He has the best control over the power of the Crucible, and is noted to have had great strength. This puts him above the likes of the Crucible Knights and arguably the Godskins, who are also compared to the Crucible. The Crucible is the Erdtree in its most primal and vital form, so Andreas having amazing control over its power is pretty good inverse. Maybe not above Rellana, but that should just add consistency to Mesmer's placement here. Mesmer in this form should be narratively much stronger than his previous one for multiple reasons. For one, emotion and obsession are consistently a source of power in Shadow of the Erdtree, as we see with Salza and Egon, where Salza ended up burning more and more villages than anyone else among the Fire Sages. Egon, the other case, is noted in his great bow description to have had stronger attacks due to his obsession with Bale as well. So with Mesmer's obsession with the goal America gave him coming to a breaking point in which he gives into the Abyssal Serpent, his power should skyrocket in this form. Mesmer's serpents in transformation are compared to Malenia's as well in the description of Mesmer's kindling, so similarly to Malenia, his transformation should upscale him to a much higher level than he was previously. I don't necessarily believe his transformation to be inferior to Malenia's. I just believe Malenia is stronger in her base to the point that Mesmer simply isn't going to be higher than her with a comparable transformation. The twin prodigies, Miquella and Malenia, I have an interchangeable placement here. God Miquella and Rock Goddess Malenia should be relative, which is consistent with their narrative, and brings us to the top 3 of this list. God Miquella surpassed my original expectations of his power, but I can't say I'm surprised with this new-founded godhood. Similarly to Malenia and Mesmer's transformations, Miquella had to leave everything behind to obtain his innate potential, but Miquella had to an even greater extent, with having to leave behind his flesh, Great Rune, and all that made him human. Miquella possesses the ability to manipulate people's minds and souls and is the most ferocious among the demigods. He arguably surpasses his father Radahn in holy magic, with the multi-layered Ring of Light being directly a better version of Radagon's Rings of Light, and inventing his own branch of holy magic, divergent from the Erd-trained Golden Order fundamentalism. Miquella being a god should also hold great narrative significance, but that isn't always the case in the Souls games, and especially Elden Ring, so you can't really use that, sadly. Miquella's narrative doesn't allow him to be any higher than, say, number 4 on this list at the highest, as he was never going to overthrow the Erd Tree, with the Realm of Shadow and Scadu Tree being directly inferior to the Lands Between and the Erd Tree, with direct parallels in the Golden Order's continued grip over Miquella's territory. I don't see at all how he's really getting much higher than this.
Miquella's promised Consort Radahn, making his return at number 2 on the list for his highest end, right above God Miquella and Goddess Malenia. That's still below Placidus Axe. This is under the assumption that Miquella can pour a vast portion of, or even the entirety of his power into Radahn, granting Radahn linear scaling over God Miquella and turn Goddess Malenia. This is a high end, but there is little to this consistently for Radahn upscale in this DLC. Even though it functions on a low narrative, it exists nonetheless. Miquella chooses Radahn as his consort due to the immense strength and courage he possesses in contrast to his and Malenia's curses, which can be interpreted as Radahn being superior to the twins. As I said before, Radahn now possesses more abilities like Mold's Blood Flame, and given the vast amps and his gravity magic having the established capacity to do this, Radahn could likely make up for his physical inferiority to his passive by enforcing his attacks with gravity magic.
And at the final and highest placement we have Bale the Dread, above everyone up to this point, but stopping right at Placidus Axe, of course. Most people could see this coming aside from likely wanting Radahn and Miquella higher, but I don't really care about wanking Godfrey's number 1 fan and his lover Griffith. Bale, as you should know, is very relative to Placidus Axe, as their battle resulted in both being heavily and permanently injured, although with Bale fleeing, which is why Placidus Axe is remaining higher. There isn't really much else to say about Bale. He has that feat and he eventually takes over whoever consumes his heart, but that isn't really important in this context. Here's the tier list detailing all the placements I've done, with number 31, the Regal Ancestor Spirit, 30, the Scadu Tree Avatar, number 29, Meteor, Mother of Fingers, 28, Godric the Grafted, 27, Divine Beast Dancing Lion, number 26, the Putrescent Knight, 25, Fire Giant, 24, Praetor Rykard, 23, Luminary Moog, 22, Midra the Lord of Frenzy, 21, Estelle, Natural Born of the Void, number 20, Commander Gaius, 19, Star Scourge Radahn, 18, Ramana, Saint of the Bud, 17, Promised Consort Radahn, 16, Lich Dragon Fortisax, number 15, Mesmer the Impaler, 14, Morgoth the Grace Given, 13, Rennala of the Full Moon, 12, Rellana the Twin Moon Knight, 11, Base Serpent Mesmer, 10, Malenia Blade of Miquella, 9, Miquella the Kind, 8, Malenia Goddess of Rot, 7, Radahn Consort of Miquella, 6, Bale the Dread, 5, Dragon Lord Placidus Axe, number 4, the Elden Beast, 3, Godfrey, First Elden Lord, number 2, Radagon the Golden Order, and Malekith the Black Blade at number 1. Hope you all enjoyed. As you can likely infer from this video, the Elden Ring content I drop in the foreseeable future will not be primarily focused on any Remembrance boss's strength, as this 2-part video has went over my rankings for all of them already. Some other bosses and NPCs are not out of the question though, so stay tuned and even drop a suggestion in the comments for any video from the verse you want to see in the future. Have a great rest of your day.